Lena Voss had learned, a long time ago, that the best way to survive in Silverstone Pack was to be invisible. She was good at it. She kept her head down. She spoke only when spoken to. She worked before sunrise and stopped working long after everyone else had gone to sleep. She cooked the meals, cleaned the floors, carried the crates, and bandaged the wounds of wolves who did not even know her name. And every morning she woke up and did it all again. No one thanked her. No one needed to. She was an Omega. That was simply what Omegas did. But tonight was different. Tonight was the rank ceremony. The great hall of Silverstone Pack was full of light and noise. Long tables ran from wall to wall. Wolves in clean clothes filled every seat. Pups who were coming of age stood in a nervous line near the ancient stone platform at the front of the room. The ranking stone sat at the center of the platform. A smooth, dark stone, older than anyone in the room, older than the pack itself. When a wolf pressed their hand to it, it glowed. The color told everyone in the room what that wolf was. Blue for Alpha, silver for Beta, green for Gamma, soft gold for Omega. One by one, the young wolves stepped forward. One by one, the stone glowed. One by one, their families cheered and wrapped them in embraces, and the hall filled with the warm sound of belonging. Lena stood at the back. She had no family to cheer for her. She had no saved seat. She wore clothes that belonged to someone else, a shirt slightly too large, boots slightly too tight. She had spent the whole afternoon telling herself that it did not matter, that whatever the stone said, she already knew who she was. She had been surviving long enough to know that a glowing rock did not define her. She almost believed it. When the elder called her name, the hall quieted in that particular way that meant everyone already had an opinion. She felt their eyes follow her to the platform. She kept her face still. She pressed her hand to the stone and waited. The stone flickered. Then it dimmed. Then it produced a dull, broken, cracked light. The color of something dying, rather than something alive. The elder's voice was flat when he spoke. Broken Omega. The hall did not stay quiet for long. The laughter started somewhere near the back and moved forward like a wave. People she had fed, people whose children she had watched, people whose floors she had scrubbed. They laughed. Some covered their mouths. Most did not bother. And then Caden Holt stood up. Caden was the Beta's son. He was tall and sure of himself in the way of men who had never been told no. When they were children, he had told Lena he would always protect her. She had believed him. She had been 9 years old and just lost her parents, and she had held on to that promise like it was the last warm thing in a very cold world. He walked to the front of the hall and stood beside the platform and looked at her the way a person looks at something they are returning to a shop. "I withdraw my intention to choose her," he said clearly, so the whole hall could hear. "I will not be paired with a broken Omega." More laughter, some applause. Lena stood on the platform and felt every single pair of eyes in the room and made herself breathe slowly and did not let her face do anything at all. She stepped down from the platform. She walked back through the hall. She went out the side door and into the cold night air and stood against the outer wall in the dark and breathed. She did not cry. Not there. Not where anyone could see. Her wolf, Sarah, was quiet inside her. She had always been quiet. Too quiet, people said. Weak, people said. Lena pressed her hand flat against the cold stone wall and just breathed until her chest stopped being so tight. Then she went back to work. 3 days later, everything changed, though not in any way Lena could have predicted. The announcement came early in the morning, shouted across the pack grounds by 3 of the Alpha's messengers at once. Alpha King Kale Dravon was coming to Silverstone. Not at the scheduled time, not with the scheduled notice. He was coming today. The pack transformed in under an hour. People who had been sleeping were suddenly dressed and moving fast. The great hall was cleaned again. The best food was brought out. Every high-ranked wolf straightened up and put on a performance of dignity and order. Every Omega was moved out of sight. Lena was given a task so unimportant it barely had a name. She was to carry supply crates from the eastern storeroom to the outer yard, as far from the main hall as possible, where no one of any importance would see her. She didn't argue. She never argued. She just picked up the first crate and started walking. She was on her 3rd trip, arms full, moving around the corner of the outer building, when she walked directly into a wall. Except the wall moved. The wall had hands. The wall caught her. Crates hit the ground. She felt herself tipping, and then felt herself held, firmly, steadily, without any of the rough impatience she was used to. She looked up. The man looking down at her was very tall, dark hair, broad shoulders. He wore no crown, no ceremony clothes, nothing that announced what he was. But everything about him, the stillness, the steadiness, the way the two men behind him had gone completely silent, told her exactly who he was before she even formed the thought. She waited for the look, the one she was used to, the flicker of amusement, or the flat expression of someone deciding she wasn't worth their attention. Kael Dravan did neither of those things. He looked at her the way a person looks at something that has surprised them, not unpleasantly. His gray eyes moved over her face with a focus that made her want to look away, and she didn't, because she had been making herself small her entire life, and something in her was suddenly very tired of it. He held her steady until her feet were under her, then he let her go. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was quiet. "No," she said. "What is your name?" She told him. He said nothing more. He nodded once, and then walked on with his men toward the main hall. She stood in the outer yard with her fallen crates, and the distant sound of the pack scrambling to welcome their king, and she let out a long, slow breath. She did not see the way he looked back once, before he turned the corner. The formal gathering began an hour later. Lena was not invited. She sat in the kitchen and helped prepare food and listened to the noise from the great hall and told herself she did not care what happened in there. Then one of the king's men appeared in the kitchen doorway and said the Alpha King was requesting the presence of the girl from the outer yard. The kitchen went silent. Lena put down her spoon, wiped her hands, and followed him. She was still in her working clothes. There was dust on her sleeve. She did not have time to change, and she decided, walking through the corridor toward the hall, that she would not apologize for it. She was done apologizing for things that were not her fault. The doors opened. The hall was full of every ranked wolf in Silverstone pack. Packmaster Rovan sat at the head table. Caden Holt sat 2 seats down. The ranking elder was there. Every person who had laughed 3 days ago was there. Kael Dravan stood when she entered. Just stood, calmly, as if standing for her was the most natural thing in the world. Not one person in the hall made a sound. He gestured to the seat beside him, the seat reserved for an acknowledged guest of the king, and waited. Lena walked the full length of that silent hall without looking at a single face. She sat down beside him. Dinner was strange, and quiet, and absolutely electric, with tension that everyone pretended wasn't there. Kael asked her questions in a low voice between courses. Simple questions at first, about the pack, about daily life, about things she noticed. She answered honestly, because she was too tired to do otherwise, and because something about the way he listened made dishonesty feel not just wrong, but pointless. He was not performing interest. He was actually interested. She did not know what to do with that. Then Caden Holt stood up. He had been drinking. His face was red and his pride was clearly hurting, and men like Caden, Lena had learned, were at their most dangerous when their pride was hurting. He addressed the hall rather than the king. He spoke about the importance of rank, about what the ranking stone revealed. He used the words broken omega very clearly and very loudly, and let the suggestion hang in the air like smoke, the suggestion that the king, perhaps, had been misled about who was worthy of sitting beside him. Kael set down his glass. He did not raise his voice. He turned his head and looked at Caden Holt with the specific expression of a man who had run out of patience he had never actually offered in the first place. "You rejected her," he said. The hall was so quiet, his quiet voice carried perfectly. "Which means she is no longer yours to speak about." Caden's mouth opened. "Carefully," Kael added. The mouth closed. No one else said a word. That night, long after the gathering had ended, and the guests had gone to their rooms, and the pack had gone to sleep, Lena slipped out of the guest quarters Kael had arranged for her, and walked to the forest border. She had a place there, a fallen log near a narrow stream, where the trees were thick enough to block the wind, and the sound of the pack couldn't reach. She had been coming here since she was 12 years old. It was the only place that felt like it belonged to her. She sat on the log and pressed her hands to the cold earth, and felt, for the first time in 3 days, like she could actually breathe. And then Sarah stirred. Not the weak flutter she was used to. Not the dim, uncertain movement that the ranking stone had shown the hall. Something deeper, something that moved through Lena like the ground shifting under the earth, slow, enormous, and very, very awake. Lena sat completely still. She asked Sarah, without words, the way wolves spoke to their inner selves, "Why now?" Sarah answered the only way she could. Not with words, with a feeling, warm, certain, the feeling of being looked at and not found lacking. Because he didn't look at us like we were broken. Lena heard footsteps. She did not turn around, but she knew who it was before he sat down beside her on the log. They sat in silence for a while. It was not uncomfortable. Then she started talking. She didn't plan to. It just came. She told him about her parents, about the night they died when she was 9, about the rogue attack the pack said it had investigated and never spoke of again. She told him about the 13 years of invisible work, about the way she had made herself small so often that some days she wasn't sure she took up any space at all, about the laughter in the hall 3 days ago that had felt, somehow, like the last wall she had around herself finally crumbling. He listened. He did not try to fix it. He did not perform sadness. He just listened. When she was done, he said, "The stone didn't break. It was waiting." She looked at him. "There is a type of wolf," he said carefully, "whose inner self goes quiet, not from weakness, but from protection. A dormant wolf. It happens when the body recognizes danger too great to fight. So instead, it hides what is most valuable. It hides so well that even the wolf carrying it can't always feel it." Lena was very still. "You have been hidden," he said. "Not broken." The next morning, Kale called a formal tribunal. It was his right as Alpha King. It could not be refused. The subject was the rogue attack of 13 years ago. He had investigators. He had records. Records that Silverstone Pack did not know he had. He had a witness, an elderly Omega woman who had been told to stay silent and who had carried that silence like a weight for 13 years and was, at last, ready to put it down. The truth came out slowly, and then all at once. Lena's father had not simply been a pack member. He had been the last living bloodline heir of an ancient Alpha line, one of the oldest in the continent, predating even the current royal dynasty. Packmaster Roven had known. He had found out through a record search years before Lena was born. He had spent years waiting, watching, afraid of what it meant for his own power. When Lena was 9, he had arranged the attack. Her parents were gone. Lena's records were quietly altered. The bloodline was buried, and Roven had slept perfectly well every night since. The hall was absolutely silent. And then Sarah woke up. Not slowly, all at once. Lena felt it like a door being thrown open inside her chest. Enormous, brilliant, and overwhelming. She gripped the edge of the table. She pressed her feet into the floor. Every wolf in the room felt the shift in the air, the way animals feel a change in weather. Sudden, undeniable, impossible to explain to someone who had not felt it. The woman they had called broken stood up straighter without meaning to. She was not a broken Omega. She was not even a standard Omega. She was Alpha-born, by blood, by wolf, by every law that had ever existed in their world. Roven was taken from the hall by the King's Guard. Caden Holt and the ranking elder faced formal censure. Silverstone Pack was placed under crown oversight. And then Kale made a third declaration. He called it the King's Protection Vow. It was old, older than most of the laws they followed, and it meant exactly what it sounded like. He stood in front of every witness in that hall and said, in the clear, carrying voice of a man who did not need to raise it, that Lena Voss was under his personal protection, that no pack, no rank, no wolf of any standing could touch her without answering directly to the crown. It was not a declaration of love. It was something older and, in its way, more serious. It was a king standing in the open and saying, with his name and his authority behind every word, that this person would never be made small again. Lena accepted it with her shoulders back and her chin level. Then, Quietly enough that only he could hear, she said, "You could have just asked if I wanted lunch." He laughed. A real one. It startled him as much as it startled her. Weeks passed. The forest border was quieter now. The pack was different. Not perfect, not changed overnight, but different. People who had laughed walked carefully. People who had stayed silent began to speak. Lena sat on her log one evening and felt Sarah moving through her freely, easily, like water that had finally been let out of a closed space. She tipped her head back and looked at the sky through the gap in the trees and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was exactly the right size. Kale sat beside her, close enough that their arms touched. Neither of them moved away. They stayed there as the sky went dark, two people who had learned, in different ways and for different reasons, how to be patient. The world that had tried to make her disappear was slowly, thoroughly learning what it had missed. Lena breathed in the cold forest air and felt the truth of it settle in her chest, like something finally coming home. She had never needed saving. She had only ever needed someone willing to look at her long enough to see what was actually there. It turned out, in the end, those two things felt exactly the same.